Hi everybody, welcome back to Spooky Scary Storytime. I'm Ashley, and today we're going to be talking about the unsettling and mysterious death of Lauren Agee. She was a 21-year-old from Tennessee and passed away under very mysterious circumstances in 2015. So this is a true crime case, and while I normally don't cover true crime on this channel, Lauren's case was requested to be covered by a friend of mine named Tim, who was personally friends with the victim. And while I normally don't cover true crime out of respect for families and usually not being informed enough to make rational conclusions about cases like this, once I started looking into the circumstances around her death, I was deeply unsettled, and I feel like it deserves more looking into. I think you'll agree once you start hearing about the circumstances surrounding her death, the botched police investigation, and the behavior of her friends, which was suspicious to say the least once her death was ruled an accident. As far as I know, her family is still seeking answers and justice in her case, and so I hope that by sharing this just gets more eyes and ears on it. Maybe somebody out there knows something. Lauren was a 21-year-old student at Ball State studying criminal justice, and her friends and family described her as being very outgoing, very bubbly. She loved to dance, she loved to sing. They describe her as being very kind, social, and outgoing. In 2015, she was freshly 21 and had just started a new relationship with a man that all of her friends said was just a match made in heaven. They loved them together, and so by all accounts, Lauren's life is going really well. She has this great group of friends, she has this new boyfriend, she has a close relationship with her family, she's doing really well in school, she's in the prime of her life. And so that's why when she turns up dead, floating face down in the water at Center Hill Lake in July of 2015, that everyone is shocked. Wakefest is a huge wakeboarding competition and festival that takes place every year on Center Hill Lake in Smithville, Tennessee. If you're anyone who's anyone, you will be there, especially if you're in your early 20s. And so it's no surprise that Lauren wants to go, right? She wants to be in on the fun. The festival features both amateur and professional wakeboarders. It has live music, but it's also known for heavy drinking, heavy partying, even though it's marketed as a community outreach event, and it attracts more than 2,000 people every single year. So Lauren tells her mother, Sherry, that she's gonna go because it's kind of a coming of age festival. And Sherry isn't super keen on this idea because, again, it's a festival known for heavy partying, heavy drinking, but she trusts Lauren. Lauren was initially supposed to go with her friend Samantha. However, those plans fell through, and she eventually tells Sherry, her mother, that she's going to go with her friend Hannah Palmer. And Sherry did not like this idea because Sherry described Hannah as a fair weather friend. The girls had known each other for a long time, but Sherry said that Hannah was just kind of always coming and going out of Lauren's life. She only really was there when she needed something, and so she just didn't really trust her. But Lauren's 21 and she's going to do what she's going to do, and despite her mother's concerns, she says, I'm going to go. And she assures Sherry that she's going to be fine and that they're going to be staying in a cabin near the lake and that they'll be driving there on Friday and coming home on Sunday. By all accounts, it seems like Lauren actually thought this was the plan. So on the 25th of July in 2015, she says goodbye to her mother and her stepfather. She packs her sleeping bag and some clothes, and her and Hannah make the drive to Centerville Lake. And by all accounts, they seem to be very excited for the weekend ahead. They even posted some photos on social media. You can see that they're in the car. They're clearly smiling. They're clearly having a good time. And unbeknownst to them, the weekend would take a horrible, horrible turn. Once the girls arrive at the lake, that's when things seem to get a little bit hazy because all of a sudden plans change and they're no longer going to be staying in a cabin. In fact, they're going to be camping on the edge of the cliff, and it's not just going to be the two of them. It's going to be Hannah's boyfriend, Aaron Lilly, and his friend Christopher Stout. And it's unclear if this was supposed to be like a wing woman double date situation, but seeing as how Lauren was in a new relationship that she was happy with, it doesn't seem like she had any knowledge that this was going to be the case. But here I'm just speculating, although I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt. So now the four of them are camping on the side of this cliff on the lake. Lauren had apparently told her friend Cassie at some point that weekend that she had no prior knowledge that they were going to be camping. She thought that they were going to be sleeping in a cabin, but it's unclear as to whether or not she just told Cassie this so that her mother and stepfather wouldn't find out and they wouldn't worry. We don't really know. But because Lauren didn't seem prepared to be camping outside in the elements, like all she had was a sleeping bag, a change of clothes, and her phone, we can assume probably that she didn't actually know that they were going to be camping on this cliffside. It's also worthy of noting that the only shoes she brought were flip-flops, and so I highly doubt that she knew that she'd be camping on this cliffside because you have to hike up to get to this campsite. And if she would have known, she probably would have brought better shoes because, again, these aren't like paved trails to get up to these cliffs. These are like rough terrain with rocks, overgrowth, and all kinds of other obstacles. I live in Tennessee. I've been to these cliffs. I know what kind of terrain that they must have hiked to get up there. So the area that they were camping in was a steep cliffside with a 90-foot drop on one side and a 40-foot drop on the other. And the only way for them to get up there is to canoe across the lake to the outcrop and then use a rope to pull themselves up. Using this rope, they would have had to avoid trees, rocks, bushes, ledges on their ascent. And despite the conditions to get up to this campsite, they reached the top. And at the top, they begin to set up. Now, the boys had apparently brought a tent where they planned for Aaron and Hannah to sleep, and then they set up a hammock and they said, Chris and Lauren, this is where you're going to sleep. And Lauren appeared to have no idea that she was going to be sleeping in a hammock with Chris, this guy that she didn't know. Lauren's friend Cassie, the one that also told her mother that she didn't know that they were going to be camping on this cliffside, she ended up saying that over the weekend, Lauren also told her that she was uncomfortable with this sleeping situation, and this is important for later. Okay, so remember how I said they had to kind of scale themselves up this cliff by using a rope? Well, that's the only other way that they could get down besides jumping off the side of the cliff into the water and hoping they miss some jagged rocks in the water. Now, cliff jumping is a relatively normal occurrence in Tennessee. It's not safe, but people do it. But either way, these are the two options for them to get back down to the festival where everything is taking place. And so the four of them decide to jump off the cliff down into the water to get back to the festival after setting up camp. Now, Hannah, Chris, and Aaron later reported that Lauren hit her head after making this jump and she may have been concussed. But this is interesting because alcohol in combination with a concussion probably would have caused her to be acting different, and everybody else who saw her that night say that she was completely fine. She was in a good mood, high spirits. She was acting as she should. We can't rule out though that she may have been concussed and she may have hit her head like they said. There is video footage of her at Marina Bar where she appears to be dancing, talking to people in a good mood, and nobody seemed to note that anything was off about her. However, if she was concussed, it just means that nobody else saw any change in her behavior. There's also video footage from that bar of Aaron and his ex-girlfriend Cassie. Cassie was Aaron's ex-girlfriend, and there was some kind of altercation with her at the bar. She ended up pulling Lauren aside and asking if she was okay, which is when Lauren told her about how she was uncomfortable with the sleeping situation and how the weekend hadn't panned out to be what she was expecting. Cassie asked Lauren if her and Chris are together and if that's why they're sleeping in this hammock together, and that's when Lauren tells her, no, I didn't know about this. I'm uncomfortable with the sleeping situation, quite frankly. She also tells Cassie, I'm in a happy relationship. I have absolutely no romantic feelings toward Chris. Cassie has said that she could definitely tell that Lauren was at least a little bit intoxicated as they were having this conversation. Now, sometime that night between 12 a.m. and 2 a.m., though the time is disputed, the group decides we're going to head back to the campsite, but Lauren is having second thoughts and she actually asks Cassie if she can stay with her. Cassie says, I'd love to have you, but unfortunately there's no room in our cabin. And so Lauren reluctantly goes with the other three to head back to their campsite on the top of the cliff. There is apparently video footage that exists that was posted that night of them heading into their canoe yelling, headed for the death trap, although I couldn't find this footage. And despite how dangerous it was for them to be crossing the lake by canoe and then climbing up this cliffside to camp, despite how dangerous that was, they do appear to have made it back unscathed. But that was the last time that anyone saw Lauren alive. This is a photo that was supposedly taken of Lauren and Chris after they had returned, but many people have pointed out that it seems like it's daylight, although it could be the flash, but to me, I don't know. It looks like a photo that may have been taken earlier in the daytime, but supposedly this photo was taken after they had returned back to the campsite that night. For anyone just listening to the audio, it's a photo of Lauren and Chris in the hammock, and Chris told investigators that it was taken at the end of the night. After this, they all supposedly went to sleep. At 4:45 the next day on July 26th, a fisherman and his son were out on the water when they spot something floating. And at first they just think it's a pair of pink shorts that have been discarded and are floating in the water, but they pull up to it and they are shocked and horrified to see that it's actually the body of a young woman floating face down in the water. The fisherman and his son immediately call the police, and as the police are coming over to remove the body, they see Chris and Aaron rounding the corner of the cove that her body was discovered in a canoe. The boys immediately ask the police if they've found their friend, and this is the first time that their behavior is called into question. And one of the investigators would later say that he believed that the boys knew where her body was the entire time, and that this question that they asked them was sort of an act to make them think that they didn't know anything about the body. What's interesting to note about the position of her body, I don't mean the position of her body in terms of being face down in the water, but the location of her body per se, is that it was found in a cove that is opposite the marina. So the cliff faced two different ways, obviously, and the side that they were camping on faced the marina. The cove where Lauren was found is located behind the cliff where the four were camping, but their campsite was actually on the other side, the side of the cliff that faces the marina. So then the opposite side of where her body was found. So the general consensus consensus is then, if we're to believe that the boys didn't know where her body was or what happened to her, then they got in their canoe, and instead of facing toward the marina, which would have been the direction that they would have been jumping if they would have been going back to the marina and festival, that they got in the canoe and went in the opposite direction to eventually discover her body. The boys were questioned, and their demeanor was described as being unsympathetic and nervous, although we don't know why they were acting this way. But what's alarming to investigators is the fact that she has actually not been reported missing, and it's been supposedly 14 hours since anyone has seen her. All of Lauren's things were still on the cliff: her phone, her shoes, her sleeping bag, and like we talked about before, the terrain of this cliffside is very rough, so it's very unlikely that she would have walked down barefoot. The general consensus would be then that she jumped. It's been suggested that she may have jumped with the hopes of being picked up by someone else on a boat, maybe another group that had agreed to come and let her stay, but then why wouldn't the police have been called if she had had an accident when she jumped off the cliff? So after Lauren's body is discovered, they take Hannah, Aaron, and Chris on the boat back to the mainland for questioning. And on the boat is when their stories start to get real weird and nothing's adding up. Aaron, for one, says that Lauren actually never made it back to camp with them despite all of her things being at the campsite. Hannah claims that Lauren left the campsite early in the morning and she jumped off the side and she got into a boat with some random boys. She says she woke up to see all of Lauren's things still there, but that she assumed that she would just be back for them later. Chris stated that he just believed that Hannah got up in the middle of the night and left, although he said he didn't feel her leaving the hammock. But even though that all their stories are different, they all just say, we woke up and she wasn't there, but we weren't too worried about it. Now, the entirety of this conversation between the three friends and the police takes place on this boat to the mainland. And the officers who were interviewing them describe them as being very nervous throughout. Apparently, the three of them were just whispering to each other constantly, and Aaron repeatedly was saying to the other two, don't mention anything, I'll do the talking. And when one of the officers asked the three of them what they were whispering and talking about, Aaron reportedly said, I'm thinking about how I'm going to get that gun off your hip and get off this boat. Lauren's body is then brought back to the shore where they do an autopsy, and it's revealed that she suffered from blunt force trauma as well as other injuries like broken fingers, a broken nose, bruises, and hemorrhaging on her back and hips. What's alarming about her autopsy is how little water was actually found in her lungs. Now, people have pointed out the possibility of dry drowning, though this usually occurs in older people or young children, or people in poor health, which would not apply to Lauren. Despite these inconsistencies from the stories to the autopsy, authorities rule her death an accident. No foul play is suspected. Case closed, open shut. They speculate that Lauren fell off the cliff while intoxicated, hit her head, suffered blunt force trauma, and that her injuries were a result of the fall. Now, naturally, when Lauren's mother Sherry finds out about this, she is beyond upset. She immediately asks to speak to the friends, but the police inform her that they have already been released. Sherry at first refrains from demanding further investigation, deciding to trust the police, but then as she thinks about it and wonders, why did nobody report my daughter missing, she starts asking more questions, and she goes to the police and she asks for more evidence, for more investigation. And she reports that she was told by one of the investigating officers that that officer did in fact suspect foul play. He tells her that all of the friends gave different stories, and when Sherry hears this, she is rightfully upset and she demands a reopening of the case and further investigation. That request was denied. Now, Cassie, who Lauren had had that conversation with at the marina the last night anyone saw her, Cassie reports that she was also disturbed by Lauren's death, and she actually goes forward to authorities and says that Aaron was physically abusive to her during the time that they dated. She produces photographs of her injuries, and Aaron had been arrested for domestic violence for biting her and choking her. Chris Stout also had a record. He had been charged with 3 DUIs, including one for fleeing the scene of an accident. However, the police say that this is unrelated and that don't think that these friends' histories should be questioned, and still refuse to this day to investigate further. Now, there has been some private interest in this case and some people that have looked into this independently, including where someone tried to reenact where a body would have fallen had it fallen off the cliff. There's also very questionable and concerning commentary from an investigating officer. This may be upsetting, but I feel like you should listen to it to take in the full context of this case. And this was in response to why Lauren's death was not further investigated when it happened.
Now, did you ever listen to the 911 calls that were called in that initiated this case?
I didn't, no.
Okay, why not?
I just didn't.
Did you interview any of the people who had made those calls?
No, I did not.
Sitting here today, do you know when she was last seen alive?
No, I don't.
And there were houseboats, were there not, that were somewhat near this campsite that the individual has been at?
There was at the dock.
Yeah. Did you do anything to talk to them about what they may have seen the evening of Lauren's death?
No, I didn't.
Okay, why not?
I just didn't.
Did you ever look for blood on the rocks at the bottom beneath the campsite?
No, not specifically, no.
Now, if you later learned that Lauren had hemorrhaging within her throat that could be consistent with choking, Would you have taken any additional steps to investigate that?
It's possible.
Did you do anything to investigate the way the current would have flowed around that outcropping where the campsite was?
No.
Now, you never got a dive person out to the scene that day, correct?
A dive person?
Yeah, underwater investigator.
No, sir, I
You
didn't.
understand there's sometimes late cases where things are found in the water or they need to look for
Yes,
something.
sir.
Okay. That was never done in this case, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. Why not?
I didn't. I just didn't.
Were you aware that one can collect evidence from fingernails?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do anything to do that in this case?
No.
Did you do any DNA swabs of fingernails?
No.
Okay.
Where are the rest of them now? Hannah and Aaron continued dating and eventually moved to Florida. At one point, Sherry, Lauren's mom, reached out to Hannah and asked her to meet with her on Skype, and that's where Hannah's story changed again. And she claims that Lauren had got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and she says Lauren fell off the cliff then. Apparently, during the middle of this conversation, Hannah's cell phone rang. Hannah supposedly answered while Sherry was still on Skype with her. Sherry claims that the call was from Aaron, and she could hear Aaron saying, "Shut up and stick to the story." Sherry then decided to hire a private investigator. That investigator had the autopsy re-examined, and in the autopsy, they proved that there were things that hadn't been reported in the initial autopsy. The original investigation failed to disclose that Lauren had hemorrhaging in her throat. That could have indicated choking, and a rape kit was never done. The police had said that because she had a tampon in, she couldn't have been raped. One final point that I think is interesting and important to note is that there was a distinct mark of a triangle found on her chest. This indicates that her chest had to have been pressed up against something to leave that kind of mark. One of the investigators noted that Chris and Aaron's canoe had a distinct metal triangle shape that reportedly matched the triangle found on her body exactly. If that's the case, this would suggest then that the boys put her body in the canoe after death, laying her chest over that point on the canoe while they transported her to where they would leave her body in the cove. This is dismissed by investigators who say that the mark was formed when they transported her body from the cove to the mainland. However, the family and their private investigator have noted that angle of the mark on Lauren's chest and the tip of the boys' canoe was at 45 degrees while the rescue boat's was at 90 degrees. There's also some talk about Chris posting on social media, "Best weekend ever," after the trio had returned home that weekend, but this is apparently widely believed to have been posted before they found out that Lauren had actually passed away. The caption on the post was later changed. Lauren's mother, Sherry, has filed a wrongful death suit, but that was later dropped. I know that was a heavy one. I just think that it deserves more attention. There are too many odd and unsettling things in this case to ignore, and I asked my friend Tim when he sent me this story what he thought, and he said, "I 100% think that she was murdered. I think she was raped. I think horrible things happened to her, and there are people working to bring her family and her justice. Unfortunately, it has just not been taken seriously." So I always hope to be respectful when covering cases like this, and like I said, it's not my usual content, but I hope that just by getting more eyes and ears on it, that eventually justice will be served for Lauren and her family. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you're new here, please remember to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. It helps me cover more stories. I have a Patreon where you can support for as little as $3 a month. You can also help just by hyping this video. That goes a long way on YouTube. If there's a topic or a subject that I haven't covered that you would like me to cover in the future, let me know. I'm always trying to be receptive to comments. I really appreciate you guys all being here. I will see you soon.